This is the Wealth Standard Podcast, the gold standard in all things financial.
Hi, everyone. This is Patrick Donohoe. Welcome to episode 198 of the Wealth Standard Podcast. And today is going to be an interesting one. We may get off the rails with topics like Tesla and cryptocurrency, such as Bitcoin. But these are things that are really in the news, and we haven't touched on that much. And so I thought I'd bring in my good buddy Connor from Libertas Institute. See, I learned how to pronounce.
You did it correct.
I learned how to pronounce. Yeah.
Nice.
I totally botched it the last
Old
time.
dogs can learn new tricks, despite what they say.
But Connor was on a few, maybe a month and a half, a couple months ago. Mm-hmm. And I love that one. We actually broke it into 2 episodes just because we, talked forever. So hopefully we don't have to. Well, your time
can be long-winded, but
yeah, so can I. It's dangerous when you put 2 long-winded people together.
But
yeah, I think you've been talking a lot about cryptocurrency lately, and Tesla. I think there is a somewhat of a unique situation going on in Utah when it comes to Tesla. They they weren't able to establish what they wanted to as far as the dealership is concerned, but also the cryptocurrency, mainly Bitcoin, and I know there's some other kind of derivatives of that have really gone crazy these last couple of weeks. So I definitely wanted to talk about that because I know a little bit about it, but I want to know more. And so I brought you here to teach me,
I'm excited.
To school me on the philosophy of cryptocurrency.
Let's do it.
And then I can maybe throw a few angles at you, throw some curveballs.
I like it.
See what you're see if you can take my left-handed curveball.
Sounds good. I'm prepared, I think.
Okay, so let's get into maybe Tesla first. That's kind of an easy one, right? So maybe explain, because I know that it wasn't just Utah that had this issue, but you essentially had Tesla. Their business model isn't to really have a lot of cars at their dealership, correct?
Yeah,
right. So they brought in a somewhat unique business model where they may have a few cars where you can test drive, et cetera, but essentially you order the car at an iPad or a kiosk or whatever, and then they essentially ship it to you, right? So there were some people in Utah that had issue with that business model. So I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, and you're right to point out this is not just about Utah. This is happening elsewhere, but here in Utah where we're located, what you found was the entrenched opposition came out in droves, right? So they hired the Car Dealership Association, representing all the traditional car dealers, see Tesla as a threat to their business model correctly, right? It is. If Tesla were to take off and cannibalize a lot of that market share, right, that's a disadvantage to the established players. So rather than competing, rather than adapting, rather than engaging them in the market, they went to the capital. Mm-hmm. What's interesting, and what you have oftentimes, not just with Tesla and car dealerships, you have it with taxis, right, and Uber and Lyft. Yep. You have it with zoning ordinances and Airbnb or VRBO. So what you find is these regulations that were created for a day that has long since passed, in which you had these, allegedly predatory corporations taking advantage of the little guy. And that was the allegation with the car dealership laws. They're saying, look, we were really worried that the big automobile manufacturers were a threat to the individual car owners, but also the dealers. And so what they ended up creating was this regime in which dealers could not be manufacturers. You couldn't have a GM come in and open up a dealership because the dealers wanted to kind of carve out a protection so that the very entities from which they purchased their vehicles could not compete against them as dealers.
Got it.
And so you had this regime created that's been around for a while, but then you have Tesla come around that wants to be the manufacturer and the dealer because they're direct to consumer. Yep. And so it's a new business model that doesn't fit in this antiquated regulatory regime. And because of that, you now have an opportunity for the car dealers in this case to go up and lobby to try and protect that regime. They're not necessarily saying this is a wonderful thing, it should remain as is. They just like it because it benefits them and it excludes their competition.
And this is where you really start to draw the line where you have this idea of capitalism, right? And there's this, we don't really live in that type of society, right? Because in a kind of purely capitalistic society, you'd be able to have both parties compete, right?
Yeah.
And you wouldn't be able to kind of go and hire a lobbyist and then go up and have a politician pass a law or protect the law in your favor, right? But that's what we have, not just at the local level, but at the federal level too, right? So what's happened with other places in the country where Tesla had a hard time opening up their dealerships. But what happened in Utah too? I want to hear about that.
Well, the Utah case I think is rather interesting because it's not only is it recent, but it really clarifies the problem. So obviously, the reason why there was that battle is that there was one legislator who wanted to basically legalize Tesla and say we should be open to this. This is progress. This is the free market. And so her name was Representative Kim Coleman. So she ran a bill a couple years ago, trying to do this, and that gave a nexus for the opposition to come in and buy the most networked lobbyists and really try and shut the bill down, which they were successful in doing. But it was interesting. Here in Utah, unlike many other states, we have a part of our state constitution that says something like, it is the public policy of the state of Utah that a free market system shall be required, and then it goes on from there. So here's Representative Coleman. She's on the floor of the House of Representatives. All her colleagues are about to vote on this bill. There's been a debate. She's pitching everybody on, the talking points of this proposal. Yeah. Everyone, all the opposition is kind of, aired their concern, and she ends her presentation by reading that portion of the Constitution, like, look, everybody, we're supposed to have a free market. This bill gets us there. Please vote for this bill. And then it went to the vote, and then it died. The very people who had sworn in an oath to uphold the Constitution, including the requirement for a free market, didn't do it. So then it went to court. It went to the state Supreme Court, and just a few weeks ago, the state Supreme Court ruled that they couldn't do anything about it. And the reason that they gave was that provision of the Constitution that I just mentioned. It's what Tesla's attorneys were arguing based on saying, like, well, look, free market, these regulations got to go. They hinder the market. The Supreme Court had a rather narrow ruling, and they said, well, we actually can't rule in your favor, because even though the Constitution says that, that part of the Constitution does not have a mechanism by which we can do anything about it. It's just a policy statement. It's not, therefore this shall happen. And so basically our own state Supreme Court said, I'm sorry, your cause may be just, but I can't help you. See you later. And so that created a really interesting dynamic where at the end of the day now there's going to be another legislative attempt, because of that failure. So in different states, obviously everything's at different stages. And in a lot of states, it's not a problem at all. But broadly speaking, nationally, you have a lot of these laws where what you find is that when some of these laws get passed, they just get copied and pasted in other states. Like, oh, hey, that's a good idea, so we'll do something like that
instead of doing the work. Yep.
Right. And so you see this carried out in a lot of different states. It's not just a Utah thing.
So Tesla, I know they're still here, and I know they opened up kind of another facility just around the corner from where their dealership is. So
right.
What did they end up doing? Do you know
they can technically fall under like a used car dealer, and so they can sell used Tesla cars, right, rather than new cars. And so they're trying to kind of find the wiggle room around it. But yeah, they opened up this dealership, this store in good faith. And again, the question becomes, who is harmed by Tesla operating? If anything, it's quite the opposite. People are benefited. People want this. There's a market demand. And of course, you get a lot of the fear mongering on the other side where they say, well, how are people going to get their cars serviced? And what about this, that, and the other? And it's all these arguments that are, I think, specious at best. Yeah. When you kind of peel that layer away, you really realize the people making those arguments are just using those as a way to generate sympathy, when at the end of the day, they care only about their bottom line.
Well, it's the nature of innovation, right? Innovation is always going to be disruptive. And if you look at competition always ends in inefficiency, right? If you have the proper environment. And that's what's interesting is a lot of the car manufacturers and car dealerships, they're looking at the different trends that are going on when it comes to transportation. And I think there are a lot of people in the entire world that are gravitating toward more efficient transportation, whether it's riding their bike, whether it's taking public transit, and of course using, electric cars.
So here's another example that I'm thinking of is maybe at one point in time, those car dealership laws made sense. Maybe the society was structured in such a way back before I was born where there's a justification for it, right? But I think about that with something called occupational licensure laws, right? These are laws where if you want to engage in a licensed profession, you have to jump through the hoops. You have to get a license, which requires a certain type of degree and a certain number of hours, and you got to pay a fee and pass a test.
There's a food service license here in Utah. Right?
Yeah, but there's tons, right? Obviously, physicians and attorneys and CPAs, massage therapists and landscape architects, and so this has actually become a big problem. Where in the 1950s, in America, the number was actually about 1 in 20. Okay, so 1 in 20 Americans about half a century ago, as a condition of working in their chosen profession, had to get a permission slip from the government, 1 in 20. That number today, a little over half a century later, has gone from 1 in 20 to 1 in 3.
Oh my gosh.
So we live in a society where more and more people have to seek the permission of the government to do what they want. Now, the reason I bring this up is I think there's kind of a connection between the Tesla thing. Maybe car dealership laws made sense once upon a time. Maybe occupational licensure laws made sense once upon a time when out of a desire to protect the consumer, you want the government as this third party to kind of certify that they know what they're doing.
Yep.
If they're going to cut me open, I want to make sure they passed a test,
yeah.
they've studied enough, right? And so that makes sense. But for example, now with the internet, anything you buy on Amazon, you look at the rating, right? Any person you employ, college professors, you go to ratemyprofessor.com, right? We live in a day when people have this information to make informed decisions on their own. So whether it's them buying a Tesla and understanding the nuance and the risk and the potential of doing that transaction directly themselves, or hiring someone to pour a concrete pad in their backyard. I bring that up because we did that 2 months ago. I don't care if they had a license. I wanted to see their examples. I wanted to see references. I wanted to see...
And you have the technology nowadays to find that information out yourself.
Yeah, I used a service called Thumbtack where they had been employed by a bunch of people through the system who had then rated them. There were photos of past jobs. All his info was there. I didn't care if he had a license. So we live in a day where I don't think licensure laws make sense anymore. I think we live in a day where we can now transact a little bit more directly one with another, which will carry over later into our cryptocurrency discussions. We don't need these intermediaries anymore. We don't need these bureaucrats to sit in the middle of us.
I can't remember whose quote it was. It's like the closest thing to eternity is a government program.
Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, that was Reagan. That's what I thought.
Yep.
And that's the downside is there are a lot of regulations out there, and they continue to pass more and more and more of them, while the others continue to just stay in place. Yeah. And the outdating is obviously proven by some of the examples we're using today. But really looking at the future, things are going so quickly. What do you see as how the government's going to deal with laws that are in place right now that may have, because the people that are really testing those that want a food license or want to be a chiropractor or want to pass a board, I mean, that's employing people, right? That's mainly really the thing that's stuck in the ground, the stake in the ground, where you don't want to remove jobs, right, associated with those licensing bureaus or whatever. Right. So what do you see as a future that's going to happen? Do you think it's going to get easier just because there's so much innovation going on, or do you think that we're going to be running into a lot of these roadblocks?
I think progress is inevitable as kind of a general rule, but getting between here and there, I think it comes down to people, right? Because that's, if we're protecting jobs, those are people, I don't want Bob to lose his job. I feel sympathy for Bob. And so there has to be kind of a transition. I think there has to be attrition. I think there has to be kind of a process to get us there. But I think if you look at Uber's strategy, this was genius. So we, here in Utah, we broke the story a few years back when Salt Lake City, was fining drivers $6,500 for driving Uber and Lyft because of the taxi laws and the transportation laws around the airport. So they literally had government employees using the app to get a ride, and as soon as they would get dropped off, they would pay the person in the app and give them a ticket. Now, Uber's strategy was genius and this was in their playbook. They were doing this not just in Utah but elsewhere. They had raised up enough capital where they told their drivers in places like Utah $6,500. The story we broke that we ran with to kind of expose what was happening was a single mom, right, who was doing this. She couldn't afford $6,500, but Uber's strategy was they paid for the citations. They told their drivers, just keep going. We'll pay for the fine. No big deal, right? So Uber had raised enough money to do this. Well, the reason why that relates to your question of what that transition is to, for these disruptive technologies, is that when Uber had done this for a while, they had a constituency. They weren't this new company saying, Mother, may I please operate in your city, because they have no constituency, they have no leverage, they have, nothing. But here they had been operating for at least months, if not longer, in Utah. They had drivers, they had passengers, they had passionate people here where that force could go and be a counterbalancing political force against the entrenched opposition. And so I think that's what we need. Here's another example. I just learned of this service 2 weeks ago. It's called Josephine. I don't know if you've ever heard of this before. I hadn't. It's basically like Airbnb or Uber, but for food. So rather than going to a restaurant, you can order a home cooked meal from someone on Josephine who is, already cooking dinner for their family or whatever. And they'll say, hey, on Tuesday, I'm going to make, fajitas. And on Wednesday, it'll be stroganoff. And here's the price and here are your options. It's genius, right? And a great way for people to earn a little extra money. In Utah, like in other states, it's taken off a little more, especially California.
And New York too.
New York. And so in Utah, there's only one person in all of Utah that's cooking. So I went over and I bought some of her food. She's from Palestine.
Interesting.
Her name is Enos. You can go find her on Josephine, buy her some food, tell her I sent you. And I asked her the other day when I picked up this food, she's just doing it for fun because she loves to cook and everything. So she doesn't need the money. But here's the thing where that's actually, I think, illegal. I think technically, because she doesn't have a commercial grade kitchen and all this stuff, she has a food handler's permit, but those are relatively easy to get.
Limited, yeah.
And so if Josephine were to come into Utah and say, hey, we want to disrupt your entire regulatory model and allow anyone to cook for anybody else, that's going to have a ton of opposition from all the restaurant folks who have all the regulations say, hey, we have to comply with this. She should too. Whereas if there's 80 cooks on Josephine and all these people who've benefited from those meals.
Now there's clout. Yeah.
Now there's clout. Now there's that counterbalancing force. So I think what we need in disruption is these constituencies who can be head to head against the opposition. If disruption goes in and just says, hey, can we please have permission to do this? It's not going to happen. You just need to start doing it like Uber did. Regulations be damned, basically, and trudge forward and say, we're doing the right thing. We're helping people out. We'll deal with those regulations once we have to go to blows. But for the meantime, let's just go help people.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at Dreamforce in San Francisco. It was probably 3 years ago, and Benioff, in his main kind of keynote, spotlighted that type of company. And I heard their servers crash because of the publicity that they got. But I remember looking, and they didn't have anything in Utah. But it does go to those local laws where, I understand there's a time and a place for it, but right now, it's definitely in the way of innovation. And there's a lot of that. So do you think with Uber, with Josephine, with Airbnb, with a lot of these groups that have really kind of towed the line with existing legislation, do you think it's going to get easier, or do you think that we're just still going to kind of push up against it? Obviously there's the constituency and building some momentum behind it. Do you think it's ever just going to get easier? Because this one right now only has one, so they can easily shut her down.
I think the benefit though that we have is you just rattled off a bunch of company names, right? And these are companies that people are familiar with. They're companies that people like. People love going to Airbnb rather than staying at a hotel. People love taking an Uber from, going to a conference. And so people like these services. They know about them. They have good positive ID. I think what that's doing is it's acclimatizing the public to innovation. It's getting people used to disruption, and not just getting used to it in okay, I'll tolerate this, but they're excited about it. They like what's happening. And so I think broadly speaking, for voters, for the public, for media outreach and stuff, I think we have the benefit of having had to go through so many headaches. So we do this, with Libertas Institute, it seems like every single year there is a company that is facing a regulatory battle. So we had Uber and Lyft that I mentioned, the $6,500. We had Airbnb that we dealt with last year.
You did the food trucks.
Food trucks that we did as well. We have the first in the nation food truck freedom law. There was one called Zenefits. There's this creative HR insurance company, and they were illegal in Utah. Right? And so you have time and time again, and Tesla, obviously. Is still illegal. And so it seems like this is happening enough. And even though it's taking a little while to figure out the legislative dynamic with Tesla, for example, it's still not legal. The public clearly wants this. And so it's going to happen. There's no way that these laws can remain on the books for much longer. It's inevitable that it's going to change. And meanwhile, people are getting Tesla. People are eating at food trucks. People are, renting out their home illegally, and cities aren't enforcing it because they know it would be a PR backlash if they crack down with their stupid regulations on something that people love.
Yep. Well, I think in the end, because you just made a statement that said people want this. And I look at that, and I don't know if they specifically want the service. They just want cheaper and better, right? And in the end, that's the nature of innovation. And that's, I think, in a sense, the nature of human beings, or at least entrepreneurs that are really looking at inefficiency. They're looking at problems. They're looking at things that they're becoming more expensive and figuring out a way to make them cheaper with more quality. But in the end, you're always going to face those type of battles. But I do agree with you. I've always said that, I think there's going to be this like kind of convergence of innovation and government, right? Where right now the government plays a role where, they're kind of this, protector of our rights and protective of our,
sure.
Yeah. And you look at that and there's a degree of truth to it. But at the same time, you start to get into the weeds and ask, what are they really protecting with all the different laws that they're making? And really, in the end, I think that human beings are coming up with different technologies, whether it's the ways in which you're rating restaurants or rating services online. Yelp is one of the more popular
sure.
ones for restaurants. Yeah, if there's a rat in the in the kitchen, right, or there's bad food, it's all over those ratings. And so you don't need necessarily licenses or cleanliness type of inspections, right, to determine whether there's good quality at that restaurant or not,
sure.
right? So I look, going kind of into the cryptocurrency, because I think it's a good transition, right? I think as you look at what it's doing, it's fascinating, right? And I think that it's going so quick, and there's so many derivatives of kind of the original crypto, or at least the cryptocurrency that had blockchain associated with it.
Yeah.
But you look at really how quickly it's going. First off, maybe let's discuss why. Like why has this kind of? I have a guy that I work with who's a brilliant developer, and he's loved it for years, and just try to teach me a few things here and there, and I'm just like yeah. But I look at I've read a lot of the stuff that Jeff Tucker has talked about, and I've noticed news and so forth, and I realized that you started to talk about it recently.
Yeah.
What is the drive behind it? Like what are people trying to accomplish with using either exchanging their money for Bitcoin or using Bitcoin for exchange?
Oh, it's a great question. And I say this as someone who owns a little bit of it and wish I owned a lot more of it. But someone who's been following the news a while. There's also, there's not just the technical aspects to blockchain and Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, but there's also the philosophical. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what draws a lot of people. The philosophical is decentralization. It's this is a big word that I'll unpack, but it's disintermediation. So rather than having an intermediary, a bureaucrat, or a regulator between you and I, mm-hmm. we can disintermediate. We mm-hmm. can transact directly. And so the philosophy, a lot of the folks who are attracted to cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology are more libertarian individuals mm-hmm. who see that, down with the state, down with these regulators, we should be able to send value and use this. And with Bitcoin, that was always kind of the vision, and the purpose was just a transmission of value. Mm-hmm. We could do exchanges across countries, for super cheap, instantaneous, secure. And the thing about the blockchain with Bitcoin is you're transmitting little packets of data, basically, right? So Connor sends 1 Bitcoin to Pat on this date, to this address. Okay, big whoop. The potential, I think, is something that's lesser known, but it's becoming increasingly well known, especially in the past couple of weeks, and that's called Ethereum. Mm-hmm. And so this is another blockchain technology. It's basically a cousin of Bitcoin, right? And it's a super smart Russian kid who came up with this after working on Bitcoin. And the way that Ethereum is different, and the promise that it has for disruption. Bitcoin has had some disruption, but at the end of the day, it's very hard to find where to spend Bitcoin. If you buy some Bitcoin, where can you go buy gas? Where can you, stay at a hotel? In fact,
Expedia, I know, does Bitcoin.
Right, yeah. And actually, so I was involved in a project a couple of years ago called Life on Bitcoin. And this was some friends of mine who went, they got married, they went on a honeymoon, and when they got back, we took all of their cell phones, credit cards, cash, everything else, and a documentary film crew followed them around for 30 days, and they had to live only on Bitcoin. So we raised about $70,000 on Kickstarter to pay, for this film crew to do the film. They ended up extending it, I think, to like 90 or 100 days.
Really?
They had to figure out how to pay for everything at home, the rent, gas, food, insurance, everything else. And then once they got comfortable there and found people to accept
Exchange
Bitcoin and so forth, then they had to go on a road trip cross country. So they had to figure out getting gas and food and hotels. And then they had to go on international travel. So they went to like Sweden, all using Bitcoin, right?
Interesting.
And so it's fascinating, but it's hard. Even 3-4 years later, after that film, It's still hard to do. And so
is that film, is it live?
I think they're about to distribute it.
Okay,
so
it hasn't been
it went
released
through
yet.
some marketing struggles and trying to finalize it. I think it's, especially with the newfound interest, I think they're really pushing to finally get it out. So okay, there's been some disruption there with Bitcoin, but really it's just this kind of interesting, monetary transmission thing that has very small appeal to a narrow set of people. Ethereum is different. Ethereum also has a blockchain, but rather than putting a little packet of data in there, Connor sends one, Ether to Pat on this date, you can put programming language inside of the blockchain. The reason why that's important is that now you're completely decentralizing applications. Rather than me building an app on my computer and me storing your data on my computer, the programs run on everyone's computers on the blockchain. You're decentralizing programs, you're decentralizing applications. It's public, it's secure, it's open source, it's verifiable. So here's an example, right? You have Dropbox. Dropbox has server farms, and you upload your stuff there, and it's their software. There are competitors now on the Ethereum blockchain who are building decentralized versions, where if you've got a terabyte free on your computer, you say, okay, I'll let you store other people's data here. It's all secured. It's all, what's the word I'm looking for? It's all encrypted. So you can't read it or anything. And then they pay for it with storage tokens, these little sub Ethereum currencies. It's their currency within the app. The reason why all this is important, the reason why there's disruption here, if you think of, you're not that much older than me. I think we're kind of the same age. Back in the day when we'd play computer games, you'd buy it. Right. Okay. Yeah. We'll consult after on your beauty products and everything. Back in the day when we wanted to play a computer game, you had to go buy it from the manufacturer, right? I'd go buy StarCraft. That was the big one when I was, in high school, right? So you'd go buy it from Blizzard. And if you want, if Blizzard or whoever was a publicly traded company, you could get stock in Blizzard. Why Ethereum is different is it's basically like investing or having a part ownership or a stake in the Apple App Store. They're creating a protocol, a marketplace where individual developers are incentivized to come in and create their own apps. So it's not like Bitcoin where, okay, we have a blockchain and we have money and that's about it. Ethereum is different because it's also a blockchain. It also has a currency. But because it has programming language within it, you can include entire applications on this foundation. And so you're incentivizing a Dropbox competitor, what's the other one I saw the other day? You have medical solutions coming on board where they're automating entire hospital systems. You have rent contracts, real estate folks, monetary folks. You have all these people finding
marketplace
real world applications to offer their products and say, okay, look, if you look at a flow chart for a business and there's these like 20 things, the paper has to go here and they have to certify it, then it goes to these 3 people for signature. You can automate all of that within these programs, and it's all secure, it's all open and verifiable, it's efficient, it's, and so there's a whole lot of potential to actually revolutionize industry. So in the past couple of weeks, you've seen a lot of corporate interest. Bitcoin never had, it was always the dark web, buy your marijuana or kill people, it
was the privacy angle that Bitcoin really touted.
It's always had that taint of the dark web on it. Ethereum doesn't have any of that. Ethereum has had IGN, of course, now I'm going to start listing them off. Like Toyota came on board, Microsoft has come on board, Samsung,
but they're more
a bunch of other banks.
But they're more interested in the marketplace side of things as opposed to the actual currency.
Correct.
Currency itself.
They like the technology to automate and make more efficient their own processes. So in some sense, you have competitors like this Dropbox competitor competing with an establishment company. But then in some cases, you have the establishment itself saying, oh my gosh, we could reduce by 90% the friction of this process by automating it, putting it on the blockchain. So these big companies are signing on. They've created what's called the Ethereum Enterprise Alliance. So there's like 100 plus huge multinational corporations coming together and saying, we really like this. This has some interesting potential. And that's why Ethereum's value and price is skyrocketing.
Interesting. So how does the exchange work? So these companies, Toyota comes on and signs up for this Dropbox alternative or competitor. They go on there. Like, how do they exchange with one another? Is their business valued and given said, okay, for this service that we're offering, is it based on supply and demand, or is it like a preset value, or how does that work?
So it's kind of different. What's been popular right now is you have an IPO for a traditional company, but within the Ethereum / blockchain world, you have an ICO, and it's the initial coin offering. And they say, okay, look, we're going to create 100 million coins, and 20% we'll keep for the developers as incentives to get things out, and we'll sell the rest. And we're going to do an initial value of 5 cents a coin or 0.001 Bitcoin or whatever they value it as. And so they publish a white paper. A lot of them sometimes have working product, open source code that you can verify. So then you can decide, hey, is this worth investing in? Some of these guys, I saw one ICO the other day that raised, I think it was like $25 million in 5 minutes. Oh, what's really interesting about all this for me from an investment perspective, and my disclaimer here, not only do I not do this professionally, but I suck at investing. So don't take any of my advice. But all this is changing with cryptocurrency. And the reason why I'm fascinated by it is, from a traditional investment standpoint, if you want to buy stock in company X in their IPO, you want to participate in that IPO, a lot of the profit potential has already been eliminated by the venture capitalists who got in early. Where there's risk, there's reward. They got on early, their shares are worth way more. And so you buy stock in IPO and okay, you'll get incremental improvement most likely, but the potential for a really accelerated, profit is in the early stages. That's why the ICOs are really interesting, because it democratizes venture capital. No longer do you have these traditional firms and traditional processes, and they, eat up all of that profit to then recycle into gaining yet more profit in more companies. Now anyone can buy a little bit of a storage token in the early days. Anyone could have bought or did buy Ethereum in the early days. I mean, I know computer geeks, right? These are the guys who kind of were the early adopters. I know folks who got involved early in Bitcoin. They're multimillionaires now, and they just heard about it and invested, and off
it was a
you
new
go.
technology. So as I've looked at all of these, this is Ethereum. I have heard the name before. I didn't know there was a marketplace associated with it, and you had these different type of public offerings, right? But looking at really the relative value side of things, I mean, you still have a government sponsored currency as essentially the clearing price for everything. That's the relative value.
Sure.
So if you were to look at whatever an Ether would buy, or whatever a Bitcoin would buy, it's all going to be relative to a standard currency.
Sure.
Now looking at a different way to exchange, I mean I think that's brilliant. I look at why especially libertarians are frustrated with what's going on right now. Well, what's going on for 100+ years, right? With how currency is manipulated. But I think now, because of the world becoming so much more interconnected because of commerce, that you have a lot of exchange rates, and you have governments kind of manipulating their currency just to make sure that they're making profit on their imports, and they're not getting killed on their exports. So it's one of those things where I see the need for it. But how, as you've thought through, like, okay, how is this going to be a replacement, and how does it go about replacing essentially what has become this ingrained tool that, I mean, psychologically speaking, I mean, that people just use a dollar. They use and using something else is so foreign to them. How do you see that kind of our ingrained culture that has been so used to a way of doing things transitioning into something like this?
That's such a great question, because cryptocurrency will only be successful if my grandma knows how to use it, right? And I think the way that you get there right now, it's I mean, we're in basically the example that's most used within the blockchain world is that where we're at right now in terms of the technology and the development is we're in the early Netscape Navigator days of the internet, right? You've got this clunky software. It's allowing people who are savvy enough to know how to do it to interface with this internet thing. It's ugly. It's technically complex, but it's functional, and it's potentially revolutionary. That's where we're at with blockchain. So it's going to get a lot more refined. You have to have a layer of abstraction. The fact that you can pull up your phone right now and access data on a computer a million miles away, my grandma has no clue how that works. It just works. And that's where cryptocurrency has to get and will get, because people who are the developers right now recognize that mass adoption is only going to come through abstraction. It's not going to come if you know how to scan a QR code and you know what public and private keys are and you know what blockchain is and what wallets are. That will be the underpinning of the system, much like TCP/IP or HTTP or port 80, right? Those are the underpinnings of the internet, but no one has any clue about that. It's all behind the scenes. And there are developers and smart people who know about that and work on it, but that's not what the public understands. That's where we need to be with cryptocurrency. What I think is interesting is when you look at these companies signing on, they recognize that they're not going out to their shareholders and saying, hey, we're going to do all this geeky stuff. They're just trying to improve efficiency. They're trying to increase automation and decrease costs. And when that's the message that gets to the end user of, hey, this is what we're doing, this is, behind the scenes what's happening, I think that's when we're going to start to get closer to more complete adoption. We don't need grandma to know what her private key is to send Ether from her wallet to mine. She needs like Venmo. You just want to be able to go on and say, send some money over to Pat. Right?
I need food, and here's what I have to exchange for the food.
Right.
That's essentially it.
Yeah.
No, so you look at really just the world from an economic standpoint, and what role currency has. Most people were oblivious to that, in years past. But I think just I don't know what it is, but it may be news, maybe some of the documentaries that are coming out, a lot of the political campaigns, books that have been written have really kind of exposed how the monetary system works. And it's still very complex for people where it's difficult to understand, but they can see the results of it. They see higher prices, right? Even though we're innovating beyond belief, which should drive prices down, prices keep going up in a lot of instances. Not all instances, but a lot of instances. So if you look really at the reasoning behind that, it comes down to how pretty much everything in our society is leveraged, right? Everything is based on a loan. It's a debt-denominated transactional society. And you look at, whether it's was interesting. I was trying to explain this to someone the other day, and I just started using college and started using a car or a house, which are very common purchases for people, right? If there was no debt, like if you couldn't get a mortgage, nobody could get a mortgage. It was outlawed. How much would a house cost, right? Right. It wouldn't cost what it costs today, because today people buy a house based on what they can afford in a payment. Right. Same thing with a car. Same thing with college. If you just outlawed college loans, right? College funding, then you would not have the prices of tuition because no one would be able to afford them.
It's not sustainable.
Exactly. So if you look at really how prices have continued to go up and you start to peel back some of the layers, it's because of this debt-based society. And that's what's really interesting about cryptocurrency and about all of these different technologies that are coming out, is that the only tie to debt that they have is the exchange with the dollar.
Sure.
Okay. Once that starts to be compromised, that's where I really see an interesting correction take place, because if once you have really a currency, right, that doesn't have any type of debt backing, that could be really interesting. I think that's going to help society as a whole, right? Because people have to continue to earn interest. They have to continue to work more in order to be able to afford just the staple things, which, all things being equal, those costs should be going down because human beings figure out a way to make things better and cheaper and more available.
Sure.
So have you had similar thoughts to that as far as what that? Because I look at that's kind of the friction associated with a transition between where we're at today and where we could be in the future when it comes to a medium of exchange.
And let me tie it back to Tesla. When we think about what the lack of competition can do, it allows the entrenched players to increase prices, decrease quality. You don't have the same incentive. I think we have debt-denominated money, but we also have no competition in money. The reason why they can get away with that is because they don't have to compete. Whereas if we had, legalized competition in currency, they wouldn't be able to do that. Much like college prices wouldn't be able to be jacked up so high. It's because of lack of competition, the controls that government puts in place, that allows for all that friction to even exist in the first place. And so the thing that I love about cryptocurrencies is that you can move around right now. Just the other day, I sold some Ethereum and I bought some Ripple, and I sold some Litecoin and I bought Bitcoin. And as their relative price is increasing and decreasing to one another, you can move around very easily. And you see what the market does. And obviously markets impact fiat currencies, and each country's fiat currency is going up and down relative to one another. We understand that. But even within an ecosystem, the thing that I love, for me, I'm kind of an open borders guy in that borders are completely fictional and arbitrary. I love the idea of cryptocurrency because it's basically the opportunity to exchange value with anybody in the world. There's none of this arbitrariness in the way, none of this abstract dollar versus euro versus yen or whatever. And so I like it because there's competition. And if right now, Bitcoin is having a big problem. It's going up in price just because all cryptocurrencies in the past couple weeks have been going up because of all the attention that's been had. But Bitcoin is having some technological problems, and a lot of people have been selling their Bitcoin to buy Ethereum, which is the new upstart, promising new kid on the block. And so I love the ability and the ease with which you can move between them. And I agree that, we got to get away from the dollar, the debt denominated money. And I think the best thing we can do is force some competition on the dollar. And the more mainstream that cryptocurrencies get, I think that there's real potential. And regulators can't really do much about it because it's such an open system. It's not on one server. They can't go to Google and say, hey, shut that down. It's everywhere. They'd have to literally shut down the internet to stop cryptocurrency. And so who knows? They might try someday.
They may. I wouldn't put it past them. But I look at it's interesting just to see how quickly our just society is evolving, and it's exciting. I'm not sure what's going to happen in the future, but I mean, whenever you have innovation, you have disruption. But what's awesome is that it's not a kind of a disruption in a closed, as you put it, ecosystem. It's like the whole world, because the whole world is really benefiting from a lot of these innovations, and hopefully that creates, similar to the clout we talked about before, it creates the influence where something has to be done. So
I sense that we're closing, so I want to add at least this note before we get towards the end. It's so easy with this entrenchment, whether we're talking about Tesla or we're talking about taxis or we're talking about hotels, and all these people, these entrenched interests, they will always use fear. They will always try and paint scary pictures. They will always try and scare you about these edge cases that likely, but what if that happens? And, what if, like Josephine, what if you get a meal and you get
Ebola.
sick, right? It's always fear. And the opposite, the antithesis to fear is love. And so the thing I like about disruption is you think of the positive, the love-based examples of how this new technology can benefit people's lives. Think of an immigrant who comes to America to work hard and rather have to spend 15% of the money that he's sending back home on a Western Union transfer fee. He can send all of it. Think about missionaries doing humanitarian work in a third world country where there's huge mobile adoption, and they can send a little Bitcoin and say, hey, go buy some medicine in your communities, right? The applications are huge, and the potential for improving our lives. Some people will suffer. I mean, innovation always harms the people who are clung to an antiquated model. But in the aggregate, there's so much opportunity for doing good. And that's what excites me, is because we have a lot of inefficient systems. The debt is horrible. Like they're getting away with fleecing college students. There's all these bad things happening. And I like disruption because of the positive and the love-based examples that we can truly help people. There's going to be people who try and stop us, but let's keep moving forward trying to help people.
Well, I'll end with something similar, which is, I think with cryptocurrency, with money, because there's so many documentaries out there, so many people talking about it. But in the end, really, what I look at is there's not much I can do to control what the future is going to hold as far as what I use to exchange what I provide as value with somebody else who provides value. I know there's going to be something. And so the focus that I've, really kind of settled on is, if I'm valuable, if I learn, if I network, if I associate, then it doesn't matter what the currency is. As long as there's a currency, I'm going to be okay if I know how to create value. But in the end, I think that, really it's fascinating to see what a human being can do, what a mind can do, right? Just with everything, not just the cryptocurrency side of things, but the development of all. Because I've looked into it, and it's incredible how we got to this point in just the history of man, right? We
Absolutely.
go from like 100 years ago, hardly having electricity, to now talking about things that people 100 years ago would have no clue of even where to start having a conversation with us.
Totally.
So it's fascinating, and I would say for some people it may be scary, right? Because it's not what's known, it's not what they've experienced, it's not what their experience has been for the last however many years. But it's okay, right? It's cool. Accept it. It's going to happen, and figure out a way to thrive and be happy with it. But that's what I would say.
Even the poor among us live better than kings did a century ago.
Yep.
Right. The standard of living, like the rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
And some people are going to be scared. They'll lose a job. They'll have to retool and figure something else out. But you're right. You invest in yourself. We're always going to be able to find a medium of interacting with one another. I really like that thought.
Cool. All right, everyone. Well, see ya.
Elegant. I like it.
You've been listening to the Wealth Standard Podcast, the gold standard in all things financial.